Hello, my name is Michael Garrick, and this is PoppinCulture. My guest today is comedian, home inspector, and the co-host of the Home Pros radio show, Tommy Donovan. Thank you so much for coming on, man.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Good to be here.
Nice.
Yeah.
If you, like I say, Tommy's a very funny comedian. If you live in the North Carolina area or South Carolina area, make sure you check him out.
Thank you.
No problem. The topic you chose was the news and how it's influenced pop culture.
Yes.
But before we get into that, I like whenever I have a comedian on, I like to ask. A lot of people like to focus on bombing, but I'm more focused on succeeding.
Yes.
So when was the first time you killed, and how did it feel?
The first time I killed, really good question. That's a real good question. The first time I really felt like, wow, this is what it feels like, was when we did a Halloween show. It was open mic at the Comedy Zone, and people were wearing costumes and all this stuff, and doing their own thing. And I didn't go up in a costume, but I did. I got a Captain America mask. And if you're familiar for comic book fans out there, if you know Captain America's mask, it is the opposite of a COVID mask, right? It covers everything but your nose and your mouth. So I got up there on stage with just the Captain America mask on that I stole from my son's bedroom, and I was like doing a bit about how, like, hey, I like going to the grocery. People like to give me crap about we're not wearing a mask, so I'm wearing my mask today at the grocery store, and I had the mask on, and I had some lady who came up to me and was like, hey, you need to wear a mask. I'm like, I have a mask on. Were you crazy? See? And then I guess the visual of me having it on and then telling this story. And then I told this other story about how I haven't had this mask on since I did a presentation at my kid's school where they wanted me to do something a motivational speech on how to accept your challenges. It's kind of what we're going to be talking about today, a little bit about accepting who you are and maybe your defaults and use them as strengths. Well, I did a little bit about how I was captain. Well, the bit is that I was doing a presentation for the kids about a superhero who was OCD. Right, so he used his extreme pursuit of perfection to battle crime, and I called him Captain Anal. So, of course, there's the A, and then I'm acting it out on stage, and it was one of those moments where I think a switch went off. I was so into acting out the bit that I wasn't focused on, are they laughing? Do they think it's funny? What are the people in the front row? What are their expressions? I was just doing it, and the laughter was just coming, and it was just flowing out of me. And I think there's that moment as a comic where you finally, I'm pretty sure a musician goes through that too, when they really do a popular song, and it's just coming out of them, and you're connected with the audience. And there's not. I think it was that moment. It was around Halloween back in October.
Another thing, if you don't want to talk about it, we don't have to talk about it, but I would love if people, just so they can get to know you, how much did you like being a mascot?
Oh, yeah. So Michael's referring to the fact that when I was in college, I was cocky for the University of South Carolina, and I was I spent my freshman year. I can back it up a little bit and kind of tell you how I fell into this. It was a situation where I had a really good friend of mine from Seneca High School.
Okay.
Here we are at freshman at USC, looking for things to do, and he's like, "Hey, you want to try out for cheerleading?" And I was like, "What?" I mean, I knew he was a little feminine, but
okay.
And we were like best friends, and I was like, so I asked my older sister who went to Clemson. I kind of mentioned it to her, and she goes, "Oh my God, you need to try out. If you're gonna, why don't you do that?" Because she was like, those are the most popular folks in school. I mean, if you're on the cheerleading squad, everyone wants to get to know you and all that stuff. So I was like, me being never one to shy away from any spotlight. I was like, okay, so I did. So I tried out, and my friend Jason, who is now he's a touring opera singer now. Hopefully he'll get a chance to hear this one day. But he was the one that encouraged me to do this, and he was also skilled in athletics. He could tumble. I had never done any of that stuff, so I tried out. Spent a semester being a absolutely horrible cheerleader. And then the spring came around, and it was time for the school to find a new mascot, for a new cocky for USC. And the cheerleading coach was like, "Hey, Bill," his name's Bill Boggs. He was like, "Hey, why don't you try out for cocky? I think you'd be great." And I was like, "So what you trying to say? I suck at being a cheerleader? You go ahead and say it." That sort of thing. But then there was a part of me that had always wanted to do that. Now, this sounds cliche, but it is true. Filling Cocky's shoes at that day and time was a big deal.
I'm sorry. I don't know why that's funny. I don't know why I'm laughing. Go ahead.
But because up until that point, Cocky had been a professional that they had hired to go out and do all the games and all that stuff. And back in like 1986, he won the collegiate national championship for mascots. So for me, I was like, oh, those are big shoes to fill, if you will.
That's a real thing?
It is a real thing.
Okay,
yeah, it is a real. A lot of people don't know about it, but there's a national championship, and so I took on the job, and I've always been one. Whenever I take anything on, I've always been one to go, you know what? If I'm gonna do something, I'm gonna take it as far as I can. So I immediately started thinking, well, I want to win a national championship. So I went and learned how to do as much. I went and learned sign language, learned how to communicate without speaking. I was actually telling the story to Katrina before the podcast about just down the road across from the VA hospital here, there used to be a fabric store, and I went and hired a seamstress to teach me how to sew so I could make costumes for them and do all that stuff. I took it to the nines, and 2 years into it, I won the national championship in '95.
Oh wow! Congratulations!
Yeah.
Okay, wow.
So, yeah, I was the mascot national champion then. And I loved it. It was great. It was a lot of responsibility. It was a lot of, back then there was only, nowadays even at USC they'll have like 3 or 4 cockies running around covering everywhere you needed to go. But at the time it was just me, so I had to be at just about every volleyball game, every swim meet, every special appearances at hospitals and schools. Whenever someone was asking for cocky to be somewhere, I had to go. It was me. So it was a challenge, but at the same time, it was a labor of love. So I really enjoyed it.
Did it ever affect your grades?
No, it didn't. Mainly because I was a journalism student. It was an easy major. Okay. No. I was also very disciplined in that way. I was disciplined in a way that I don't know if I am now. I don't know what it was. I was just determined. I mean, I'm not a morning person, but for some reason I would get up every morning at 6, go down to the gym and work out, and then be in class by 8 or 9, depending on the day, and be done at noon. And then I'd have the rest of the day to take on all the other responsibilities that I had to do. So nice. I was just driven.
Nice, man. Well, congratulations. You definitely sound like you deserve it, man. Congratulations. 1995 mascot champion. Nice, man.
And then what happened is 96, I was graduating, and then the Panthers were awarded the franchise in Charlotte, and I immediately was like, dude, this is perfect. Yeah. So then I actually sent letter after letter to Jerry Richardson, and eventually got my foot in the door for a tryout, and ended up getting that job, and was the first Sir Purr, and did that for a number of years before going, maybe I should get a real job.
So his nickname is Sir Purr?
His name is, Sir Purr. My boss thought of that name. Okay.
I guess
it wasn't my first choice, but
I guess Panther would be copyrighted. Like that copyrighted would be too hard. They right there.
Well, we kept thinking of all kinds of really cool names that you could give a mascot, a Black Panther mascot. I like Pounce, but let's see. I think it was Georgia State's mascot was Pounce.
Okay, that's good. That would have been perfect.
There was Blitz, and that was also taken by another
Georgia, right?
That's he's Harry.
Okay.
That's another thing that I loved. You're asking me if I love being a mascot. Probably the coolest thing that I got to do as a college mascot is in college you travel. Like when I was at the Panthers, I would only mascot the home games. But in college, they take you everywhere. So I went to all the home football games, the away football games. Didn't go to away basketball games because there were so many of them.
Yeah.
But we went like to the big stuff. So like my wife was a cheerleader at USC. That's how we met. So it's one of the things we love to be able to say is we were there on the sidelines at USC's first bowl win,
Nice.
which was down in what was Joe Robbie Stadium in Miami for the Carquez Bowl.
Wow.
But we got to do a lot of things like that. And another thing I got to do a lot of, mascots are a lot like comedians. There's like a brotherhood. You kind of get to know each other. You share bits. You bounce ideas off of each other and stuff. And I spent 3 years getting to know all the other mascots in the country. I spent summers teaching mascot and cheerleading camps with the likes of Brutus the Buckeye and and the UCLA Bruin and all these other mascots around the country. Befriended a couple of them that went on to also go on professionally as well, and got to know each other and keep in touch on the professional level. It was interesting.
Nice. Well, let's get y'all stuff together.
There are a lot of parallels between mascotting and comedy.
Nice.
The biggest difference, though, is with mascotting, this is kind of funny, is with mascotting, you're making people laugh and you're entertaining people with everything but your voice because you're not supposed to talk.
True. That is an important part.
Yeah, because otherwise you break the character. But with stand-up comedy, it's the exact opposite.
Yeah.
Right? You're up there and it's all about what you say.
Yeah, that's very true.
So.
But thank you for sharing that, man. And yeah, that's amazing. Dude.
Mm-hmm.
That's amazing. That's really amazing. But to get to the topic, you chose news and how the news has influenced pop culture.
Yes.
Any special reason why you chose it?
One of the reasons why, well, actually, when you asked me to do the podcast, you said, all right, pick a pop culture item and pick a movie to review.
Yeah.
Well, the first thing that popped in my head is the movie that I'd like to review. And then I started thinking, I wrestled a lot with a pop culture item because part of me feels like, I don't know. When I think of pop culture, I think of things like hula hoops, Cabbage Patch Kids, things like, things that people find, Tickle Me Elmo from back in the 90s, things that pop in people's heads that everybody, flock toward, that influenced our culture in one way or another. I don't feel like we have a whole lot of that anymore. With the advent of the internet and social media and things like that, I think there's so much. And don't take me wrong, I'm not trying to be preachy here. This is just, I guess, my take on everything. I'm not trying to be political, and I'm not trying to be critical either. But it's just I think the way the world has worked out. I remember days when I was a kid where we don't have appointment TV anymore. What I mean by that is there was a time in the 70s when Monday Night Football was all the rage. People would make an appointment to sit down in front of the TV and watch the Monday Night Football game of the week. And it was a huge thing. And it was all of the water cooler talk the next day at work. Same thing in the late 70s, the advent of Saturday Night Live. That's another pop culture icon that just struck everybody's interest, and everyone was talking about it all at once. In the 80s, you had sitcoms like some of my favorites that I remember were The Cosby Show, Family Ties, things like that people would watch every week. We don't really have that as much anymore. TV's changed a lot. Movies have changed a lot. There's so many ways, opportunities for us to watch movies, whether it's streaming at home or going to the theaters or whatever. There's very little I feel like that all of us have in common, except maybe social media has affected us a lot. That was another thing that I was thinking of that would be worthy of having a discussion about. But I think the biggest thing for me that I've seen change is the news. Being a journalism major at USC back in the 90s, I know one of the things that was driven into our heads, if you're a reporter and you're going out there to do a story, you better make darn sure that you have your facts straight, that you've checked your sources, and that you're not making any mistakes. Because if you get out there and you report the wrong information, you're going to get sued and your career will be over. That doesn't seem to be the case anymore. No matter what side of the aisle you lean, whether you lean right or lean left, I think the biggest thing that's affected our culture in the last 20 years is how the news has turned. It used to be the news would be something that we would watch to determine what we need to think about what's going on in the world. Now I feel like what people tend to do, and this is something that I can't remember who had said this. It was a news anchor who said this, so this is an original thought. What he said was, there was a time when we would watch the news to determine what we need to think about the world. I think now we tend, as a culture, to watch the news we already think of what we already know what we think about the world. We watch whatever news influence to help justify the way we think about the world. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. That's one of the things more than anything else I feel is driving a wedge between people in a lot of ways. When I think of this, I think of my mother-in-law. She'll watch something on the news and talk to my wife about it, and my wife's like, "Nah, I don't know if that's correct." And then she'll bring her perspective, and then the response between the two of them is, "Well, that's what you think," and that's it. There seems to be a lot less of digging down to get to the source of where the truth is, as opposed to just believing your truth and believing my truth, and then we should just be okay with that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I understand people aren't doing the research.
Yeah. It's easier to hear something that we want to hear and agree with it and say that that's the truth, than it is to maybe hear or see something that we don't believe in. Sure. And then have to face it or believe it. And I say that it happens on, I think people in general, I think it's human nature. Yeah. So I know I grew up a Catholic, and it's, of course, when it comes to the Christian faith, Catholicism tends to be probably one of the most conservatives. I mean, you have your liberal Catholics, your progressive Catholics, and then you have your very conservative Catholics. And, one of the things that I would see even in the Catholic Church on the conservative side is if somebody saw something going on in the church that they didn't quite agree with or wasn't right, they would rather just put their blinders on and pretend like it wasn't happening, as opposed to actually doing something about it or speaking up about it. And I think that's one of the things that's happening a lot in our culture, especially with the cancel culture. It's easier to just say nothing than it is to challenge.
Yeah. Like people, if that's been proven throughout time, people that say nothing, like they definitely ended up being successful. Now it came out that they were said nothing, and now it's definitely not working in their favor. But it has been a lot of people that they're like, well, I'm not sure that happened. Maybe I saw it and kept riding that wave till they got to the top. But that,
Yeah. But have you noticed, though, and let me ask you this, have you noticed that the folks who do keep quiet and just go along to get along to go along, or whatever, however you say it, I would also agree that those are the people who, when they do reach the top or reach where they're trying to go, they're also easier to tear down for the media.
Yeah, of course. If you got that many skeletons in your closet, one has to peek out.
Yeah, I mean, if I would say that if you're not honest along the way and you rely on things like the media or the news to prop you up, what's the first thing? And this is the other thing, the way the news influences pop culture as a culture in general is. One interesting phenomenon I've noticed about the news is they're so interested in the stories propping up people who are trying to overcome a challenge and trying to get to the top. They're very interested in promoting the underdog. But once that underdog gets there and becomes successful, who's standing there first in line ready to tear them down?
The news.
The news.
They are. I mean, the news has always been about ratings. I'm pretty sure in journalism, that was one of the biggest things. If you're not getting clicks, you're not getting money.
Mm-hmm.
Do you consider tabloids as news? I don't, but I didn't know if you, in your profession, if they did.
I didn't, and I never have.
Okay.
When I was in college, there was still even network news was very well respected, and then you had your tabloid news, which would be, if you're talking about, say, TV, you'd be thinking like the Entertainment Tonight's and Extra and those types of shows.
Because I'm sure they get paid extra money by different people to be like, put them on my show. When it comes to news,
Yeah.
I don't think. I mean, of course, sponsorship is sponsorship, but I can't imagine somebody paying like WIS, like, put this on the news for such money.
Yeah. And see, when I was in college, I was an intern at WIS.
Really?
Yeah, and
write a book, man.
yeah, and I enjoyed that. They were very well respected at the time, and at least in my eyes. And I remember at the time, I liked WIS. You would have in every if you watch carefully, no matter what broadcasting market that you're in, there's always like one middle of the road news. It really is a reflection of the news director, but there's one middle of the road news station, and there's always one that's kind of more sensational.
Yeah.
At the time, it was WIS and WLTX, which actually is right down the road from here, was the one that I couldn't watch because they were always sensationalizing things.
Okay.
The two of them would cover the same story, and it may have changed. Gosh, this was 20 plus years ago, but I just always felt that WLTX was always like they couldn't just cover, a bank robbery. It was always like they were dramatizing it much more than they needed to. Rather than just cover the facts, they were like trying to reel the listener in or the viewer in.
Did it work in the long game?
I don't know if it ever did because I don't know where the ratings are at the time.
Okay.
And I think the reason why they're at the time, the number one station in the market was WIS. I don't know where it is now.
Okay.
But I think that was their attempt to try to win over viewership and to get attention. And then WOLO was kind of number 3 in the market at the time. And
never heard
that's
of
the
them.
ABC station.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. And then I moved to Charlotte, and it was the same kind of thing. WBTV is the CBS affiliate there, and I felt like, wow, they've got their act together. And it was what's the other station? Oh, I forget. It wasn't the it was the ABC station there. God, I can't remember the call letters, but they were always. I felt like they were sensationalizing things. So anyway, I think the news media over time has actually gone in the direction of that sensationalizing of things. It's like, what do the viewers want to hear? And I think you lose some trust and I'd say more so integrity along the way.
Yes, it's kind of just like wanting a bandwagon, not just wanting like a loyal team. Like if you go equal, like straight up the road, like in the middle, you would hopefully gain both, or you would just want people that want the truth. But if you just lean on one side or the other, it really shows being biased.
Yes.
Yeah. When it comes to the social media aspect, because a lot of news outlets use social media now, do you think just the fact that like everything's updated so regularly that it helps, or do you feel like it hurts?
Oh, that's a good question. I think it hurts in many ways. The news cycle has changed a lot. There's a lot that's thrown out there. I mean, think about. I would probably say, and I don't have any facts to prove this, but I would think most people these days get their news from the homepage on their computer when they get on the internet, whether it's MSN or Yahoo, whatever comes up on their computer. Look at all the stories that just pop up right there on that one homepage. And there's so much clickbait. And, it used to be, this is, again, going back to the 80s, you get home from work And then there was the 6 o'clock news, the national news, 3 TV stations sharing those stories. And within a 30-minute broadcast, you only have so much room for stories. Now we have news networks that are giving us the news constantly. And what are they always doing? Every hour, every 30 minutes? Oh, we have a news alert or we have a news update. And it's always something that they're trying to grab your attention with to reel you in so you don't go away. And it's usually something that is not really intensely newsworthy. And I think what happens is in their attempts to sensationalize or intensify the importance of whatever it is they're reporting, I think in some ways it does a disservice to the viewer or the listener because they're thinking that this is much more earth-shattering than it probably really is. Does that make sense?
Totally. I agree 100%. Like, they definitely are. News has definitely changed just in my lifetime. I'm 29, but yeah, I've seen it change in my lifetime. Focus on something that's very serious that happened. I didn't even know you were a journalist major. That's awesome.
Yeah.
I feel way better asking these questions now.
Yeah.
When it came to how they handled 9/11, from a journalist point of view, do you feel like the news handled it perfect, or do you feel like at that time period people were still trying to they weren't looking at it as a tragic event. They were trying to look at it more like, all right, we can get eyes on our channel.
That's a good question.
I was like 9, so I can't help you with this at all. Answer this at all.
What I remember, the way, because I was glued. I was actually working in a newspaper the day that happened. I was working for the Greenville, not for the Greenville. I was an independent contractor working at the Greenville News in Greenville. And I worked in the classifieds department, so I wasn't in the news department. But I remember getting up that morning when it happened and seeing we had the Today Show on. The first plane hit the tower. Well, we didn't see the plane hit the tower. We just saw the smoke. Everyone knows the story. It was the second plane that we actually saw and went, what's going on? I feel like at the time, the news was much better at actually reporting, y'all, this is what's happening. We're going to bring you as much information as we can before, as we discover it. I feel like my concern would be if something like that were to happen today. I hope this wouldn't happen, but it seems like the mentality of the news media and our culture is that if something like that were to happen today, I think we've been conditioned because of the way the news has been reporting incidents over the past 10 years or so, is to start immediately asking questions regarding, all right, who's responsible? Who was it? All right, who did it, and where are they from? All right, do they support the right side or the left? Are they blue or are they red? That sort of thing, rather than focusing on what really happened. It was an interesting time to be in America at the time that 9/11 happened, because when it happened, it was almost as if it didn't matter. All those silly things that we tend to argue about now didn't matter. It was like somebody attacked our country.
So yeah, something else to hate.
What are we going to do now?
Yeah.
What are we going to do about it? I mean, we need to. It was the closest thing that I can think of what it must have been like to be an American when Pearl Harbor happened. It's in many ways it kind of made you proud. At least it made me, because I felt like everyone was like, wow, this is horrible. Somebody attacked us. And it was almost as if our country was united. We were united for at least a while.
Yeah, I grew up Jehovah's Witness, so I don't want to get into the religion, but I just remember you're right. Like, people were nicer. Like in retrospect, when I used to have to go to doors with my mom or somebody, that was one of the few. I remember that week in particular, people definitely were like, yeah, I want to know more about the Bible. Please open the door. And I just remember that being the only clear thing that I can remember from that week, because I was in elementary, so you had a child at that point.
I did, and well, let's see. My daughter was born. See, that was September 11th. No, I didn't. My daughter wasn't born yet.
Okay, never mind then.
So that was September 11th, 2001. My daughter, my oldest, was born December 22nd, 2001.
Okay, cool.
So we were about to have a kid.
Yeah. Okay, so yeah.
So, I mean, my mind was obviously thinking about bigger things than just me at that time.
Yeah, yeah, I bet so. Yeah,
Yeah.
like this is you don't. Yeah,
But there's a priest that said to me, well, he said one time, I've always found this interesting. He said to me, ask any priest, Catholic priest, and I'd be interested to see how pastors feel about this too, because I bet they would agree. They would much rather, if they had the option of performing a wedding or performing a funeral, in most cases they prefer to perform a funeral service. And the reason why is because, well, in the context of what is a tragedy as opposed to a celebration, there are more people at the funeral who have their mind on God as opposed to the celebration, which would be the wedding, when they're thinking about, hey, where's the reception? Is there going to be an open bar? Everyone's focusing on, there isn't as much of a focus on the big stuff, the important things in life, if you will, as compared to, the funeral experience, when people are really going, asking even themselves, who am I? What will people think of me when I die? What's going to happen to me now? And there was a lot of that in the United States at the time September 11th happened.
You're 100% right on that, because you go to a funeral, it's like, man, I miss my friend. This could happen. You think about how quick life, can go by, and then when it comes to weddings, it's like, man, fuck, I gotta waste my Saturday.
yeah.
Let me get this toaster, and I guess try to do the two-step, and
yeah,
hopefully I can get out of here.
Yeah.
But you're totally right. News outlets in general. Is it true there's really only two big news outlets, or is it more?
Well, now there are a whole lot more. The way I see it is,
okay. No, I mean like two big channels. Like it's different news outlets, but it's all ran by two different companies, I guess.
No, I would say not so much.
Okay.
It used to be you'd have ABC, CBS, NBC as far as the media companies, or at least the networks.
Three, yes.
Right, and of course with the advent of cable TV, now we've got CNN. MSNBC is owned by NBC.
Yeah.
And then you've got Fox News, and you've got One America, and then you've got BBC, and there are all kinds of outlets out there now. There's so many choices, and I think that's why the media has turned into something where rather than having a resource to look toward to find out what we need to think about the world today, because we have all these choices, we're free and clear to pick the one that agrees most with what we want to interpret the world as being.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It's I see a parallel to religion, right? I think religion's gotten to be to the point where it's like, when Jesus, for the Christians out there, when Jesus was on the earth, he would preach to the people around him, and there was one church that was created after him being crucified. But over time, what ended up happening is then you branch off, you get the Lutheran Church, and then you get the Baptist Church and the Presbyterian Church and all these others that break off of what originally was the Catholic Church. And what it is humans turning God into something that they want to believe him to be.
Yeah, pretty much.
Right? And then I feel like that's what we're doing with the news. This is what's going on in the world. Going back to my mother-in-law, she would rather find the Whoopi Goldberg or the Joy Behar who believes in what she believes in, as opposed to going, all right, let's really think about this. Let's look at all angles. Let's look at all parts of the argument to see what my own opinion should be.
Nice. Is it and you don't have to answer this question, but where would you tell people, hey, don't go there to find your news?
Ooh.
I would say podcasts in general. Like I've seen a few news podcasts. I'm just like, this is not.
Well, yeah, and I would say yes. You know, I make a joke about podcasts. You've got a podcast, I've got a podcast, and I'm like, opinions are like podcasts.
Yeah.
Or, you know, everyone's got one.
Exactly.
The same thing with, you know, what they say about assholes. Everyone's got one.
Yeah.
But yeah, podcasts, the internet, that's the worst place because anybody can put anything out there, just like with the podcasts.
Yeah, I learned that with Yahoo. I was big on like looking at Yahoo News, and don't get me wrong, some things they're spot on. But then it was like a few articles I started like doing my own research, and I was like, no, that is not what happened at all. This is you literally took like the first 3 sentences of what really happened and just added other stuff. Like
Yeah, and it frustrates me because of the way I was trained when I was a journalism major, and my daughter is now a journalism major at the University of South Carolina, and she about shot me when we were going through a tour. This was back last spring. We're going through the tour of the journalism school, and it was funny because our tour guide was like, "Hey, wait a minute." She kind of looks around the corner and she's like, "I think the dean might even be in his office. How about I knock on his door? Maybe he can come out and introduce himself to you." And we're like, "Cool, great, yeah." So she goes in, gets the dean. The dean comes out, does this big sales pitch. This is why you need to go to USC, be a journalism student and all that. Anybody have any questions? I was like, "I do." And my daughter's like hand is buried in, or her face is buried in her hand. And I'm like, "I have a question. When I was a student here," and I kind of said the same thing. You know, we were told that stick to the facts, report the truth, check your sources, or your career could be at stake. That doesn't seem to be the case these days. I was a student afraid to get a job as a news reporter because I didn't want to be held liable for making a mistake. Now it seems like everyone's out there just saying whatever they want with no repercussions. What is your opinion on that? And he was like, and he gave me the typical, well, there are bad apples in every bunch, and, you know, this, that, and the other thing. And I didn't really get a satisfactory answer, in my opinion. And it was funny, too, because after he left, all the parents came over to me and was like, "So tell me more about, so you were a student here, and is it really that different?" and all that. And I'm like, yeah, well, unfortunately it is. And that's frustrating. And I try to to add to your question about, like, where would you tell people not to look for news? As a father who has influential kids, I'm at a point in my life where they're not going to believe everything I say anymore. The cool thing about having little kids is you can tell them anything, and they're like, "Well, Dad said it," but now they question me. So now my job is to point them in the direction of, hey, don't look at me. I got it from X, Y, or Z. And what I tell them is, you can go to your sources that you prefer to check, but at this day and age, you've got to check and double check and triple check to make sure that you're getting the information, because it's scary. I mean, I watch the sources that I believe that I trust, but then there are those moments where I'm like, wait a second, and I have to cross-reference it with, you know, this reporter or that reporter or, you know, that pundit, so I can come up with an opinion of myself. There's one host who interviewed somebody on his show about the transgender bill that was denied in their state, and he was really raking that person across the coals for vetoing that bill, and usually I agree with everything he says, and he was really riding this politician for not really following through with what he thought she should have done, and I was like, wait a minute, that doesn't sound right. No. So when that flag pops up, that's your cue to go, all right, well, I appreciate your opinion. Let me go over here and look. And then the other sources that I checked were more so in line with what I thought. Yeah. Not that I was looking for validation, but it's one of those things where you got to put the pieces of the puzzle together.
Yeah, I've learned now when it comes to news, if they only hit 2 plot point, like they only hit 2 lines, like, well, this bill says this and this, and then I finally see a picture of the bill and it's like this long. It's like, hey, I feel like he might have said no to a lot more that we don't know about. Like,
yeah,
like
you mean it took them 10,000 pages just to say this and this?
Yeah, like
there's some more to it.
I mean, I agree that those 2 things are fine, but if I kept reading and I was like, oh, we all have to stay in our house for a year, like no, let's not prove that.
Yeah.
But yeah, man, thank you for coming on to the show. Is there anything else you'd like to add about the news?
No, not really. It's just one of those things where I think we would all be in a better place if we could just be open to checking our resources, cross-referencing things. I think we'd all be more comfortable with where we sit in the world. Yeah. I think a lot of times when people get frustrated or angry when debates about newsworthy types of things happen is when they don't open their minds up to understanding the big picture. And that kind of goes into the the movie the movie critique that I came up with. So
nice.
I tried to come up with something that goes hand in hand with that. So hopefully that helps.
That's gonna be awesome, man.
Yeah.
Is there anything you want to say to your fans?
Oh, thanks for being my fans. First of all, I appreciate it, and it's a pleasure to they're as a budding comedian or comic. It's great to have the opportunity to do things with Michael because I think he and I see things kind of at the same level when it comes to comedy. And, I highly recommend him. And hopefully we'll get to do a lot of shows together you can come out and see us do.
Definitely. Mm-hmm. Where can they follow you on social media?
Social media, I've got a couple of places. I haven't really talked about the podcast that I do. It's the Home Pros Radio Show. As a home inspector, I started a podcast and a radio show that talks about home improvement. And what we do is we do a lot of informational things that help homeowners understand how to take care of their homes. But we also do it with a little bit of fun. Yeah. And that's where the comedy kind of, we get a little bit of that in there. And so you can find me at all the social media outlets at Home Pros Radios, where you can find that podcast. You can also find me. I've just started my own comedy social media outlets, Instagram, Twitter, and all that, which is Tommy D Comedy, which my daughter thought of, and I was pretty proud of her. I never put 2 of those together, but it worked out. So Tommy D, I think on Instagram, I'm like TommyD.comedy. That's where you can find me there as well.
Nice. Yeah, guys, definitely check out the podcast. They drop a lot of gems. You guys really do drop a lot of gems on the podcast. And definitely check them out.
And we're also on YouTube. You can find our live stream of our show every Wednesday night at 6 o'clock. You can watch us live, even call into the show. And you can find our YouTube channel where we have a lot of those clips that you're mentioning. Yeah.
Exactly. All right, guys. Thank you so much for listening and have an amazing day. Mm-hmm.